is the United States going to come on board and help you with these strikes?
That's a decision for the president to make, but I can tell you that they're already helping a lot because they're participating in the protection of the skies over Israel and its cities with THAAD missile batteries that are in Israel, with Aegis ships that are on the shore of Israel, with their pilots that are fighting alongside our pilots to knock out drones. I think it's a remarkable cooperation.
So that was Benjamin Netanyahu earlier today answering the question that's on everybody's mind right now. Is the United States going to enter the war against Iran on the side of Israel? And according to the Israeli prime minister, yeah, he kind of already is. We're going to talk about the potential ramifications of that. And if there's a line that's, trying to navigate and trying to be just kind of pregnant, but not really pregnant, that kind of thing. And to answer some of this stuff, we have one of our favorite former Commodore Steve Jeremy from the United Kingdom, the Royal Navy, combat veteran of the First Order. Commodore, welcome back to the show as always.
Yeah, good to be back, Danny. We live in interesting times, don't we?
Boy, and this is one of those, because I think that certainly the region, but in many respects, the world is kind of on a knife's edge, wondering where this is about to go and what the United States is doing. We've, of course, moved all kinds of combat power into the region. We've had the B-2s and the B-52s on Diego Garcia for quite a while now. There's some actually ground attack aircraft. There is 3 separate aircraft carriers that are either in the region or on the way to the region. More destroyers. You've also got a lot of air power. Some of it's on top of that. We also have air power on the region and some of our fixed bases in the region as well. And of course, as you just heard, we're physically helping Israel so far by shooting down some of the incoming drones and missiles from Iran. They've also been helping with providing ammunition and weapon interceptors and all kinds of other stuff. But the real question, though, Steve, is what is Trump going to do on the offensive capacity? And let me just first of all ask you, how much of a distinction do you think it's going to matter, especially to the Iranians, if we, quote, only help to the extent that Netanyahu just revealed that we are, or as opposed to crossing the line and we do the offensive actions?
I think it's a very difficult question to answer, Danny, but my strong suspicion is that as soon as America goes on to the offensive, then all bets are off with any holdbacks that the Iranians have been doing so far. What we're seeing, of course, with the American support is that actually the Israeli air defense isn't watertight. It's far from watertight. That's something that you and I talked about some time ago. I think it might have been 2 or 3 months ago, and how vulnerable I certainly thought that Israel was. But I imagine that the Iranians would, for the moment, calculate that it's not in their interest to go much broader as long as America is essentially providing defensive measures. But as soon as America moves on to the offensive, I think that there's nothing for the Iranians to lose on this. And certainly listening to 1 or 2 other Iranian commentators, I think they would go on to the offensive. I mean, the fact is as well that despite all that combat power in the region, and it's a big amount of combat power, it's all air and sea. So it's all about strategic bombardment and the maintenance of either air defense or air superiority or air supremacy. And for as long as America and Israel refuses to put troops on the ground in Iran, and we know that they won't, then it's always going to be a question of strategic bombardment rather than actually making a substantive difference in the campaign. When you look at the size of, I was just doing some comparison, the size of Iran, it's about the size of Western Europe. And Israel, this is a point I've made before, Israel is a 75th the size of Iran. So surprise, surprise, it's a densely populated area which is very vulnerable to strategic bombardment. And Iran's the opposite. Not say that Tehran isn't vulnerable, but on balance, I would expect in any sort of strategic bombardment free-for-all that Israel's always going to come off worse. We probably know that because all of the Israeli media and journalists are being stopped from talking about impacts of Iranian ballistic missiles and hypersonic missiles in Israel. So I think short answer to your question is I think it will probably be okay for as long as the Americans don't go on the offensive. But as soon as they do, I would expect American forces to be attacked.
Let's look at before we go too much further down that path here. I want to look at something because you kind of mentioned it a second ago. I do recall you and I a couple of months ago were talking about the vulnerability of the Iranian air defense systems. Let's take a look at just what this tells us about modern war right now, because we have the Israelis by themselves have the Iron Dome. They have the David Sling. They have the Arrow 3. There's Patriot air defense systems, our stuff in there, and there's high altitude air defense systems that they have also from us. And now we find out, and this is the first I'd heard of it, we have Aegis Ashore or Aegis ships that are out there with additional sea-based air defense capabilities. So you're talking a ton of capability, and yet every single time we see these missiles are getting through. What does that tell us about how vulnerable any state is to air defense or air offensive missiles these days?
I think the distinction, Danny, I was an air defender in a destroyer, so I commanded a Type 45 destroyer, which was what was known as area air defense. So point defense is you're protecting your own ship. Area air defense is you're protecting a whole range of things, and then indeed that's what the Aegis cruisers are doing. They've got phased array radar with standard missiles. And the issue is shooting down ballistic missiles and hypersonic missiles. They're extremely difficult targets. You know, it's difficult enough for shooting down cruise missiles, or it's easier cruise missiles at subsonic speeds. But if you're trying to shoot down ballistic missiles at sort of Mach 3.5 and hypersonic missiles at Mach 10, Mach 12, I'm not aware of, the Russians may have something, I'm not aware of any Western capability that can take on hypersonic missiles. And I think that our capabilities against ballistic missiles at slower speeds are also difficult because of the way they operate. And I think we've seen this playing out over, Gary is showing us the pictures. Ted Postel, as always, is very good on this. And I think he's made the same point in a slightly more technical way. But speaking as an ex-air defender, I can think of the amount of missiles you've got on a ship. You know, we used to have only 26, I think, so you'll fire those off super quick. And even an American Aegis cruiser, from memory, it's about 96. I think it's two standard, two Mark 41 launch, two sets of Mark 41 launchers forward and aft, with a total missile outfit of about 96 missiles. And if you're firing 2 missiles per ballistic missile coming in, you can see how quickly you'll use those up, even with that size of ammunition outfit. So I think what I'm suspecting is that the Iranians are in a sort of measured campaign, probably using older missiles before the newer ones, letting us wear down our air defense capability, draw air defense ammunition from other places, and then when that starts to run short, then we'll be in trouble, or Israel will be in trouble, I should say.
Yeah. And in fact, one of the things that Ted Postel told us was that when we were looking at some of those images, especially some of the ones where you see like a large density of missiles coming in all at the same time, he pointed out a couple of things. First of all, you didn't see any of those, at least at that particular videos, even attempted to be shot down. Some others had, but there were a few times where, wow, that's that one right there. You see, these things here, these indicate that they're the older models, because he said a lot of the warheads are coming disconnected. He said that's why you see the trail behind it. He said the ones that are coming in hot and clean, like it looks like a dot, he said those are the ones that are coming in with that are like they're supposed to, implying that they are using a lot of their older stuff that's only marginally successful, but that you do have to fire all these air defense missiles to try and intercept them. The Wall Street Journal said yesterday that Israel is running dangerously low on interceptors. So it seems to me that we may be in a situation to see who's going to run out first. Is Iran going to run out of offensive missiles, or is Israel going to run out of defensive missiles? How do you see that balance playing out?
I would think it's going to be the latter of those two. I suspect that Israel will run out of defensive missiles, and even with the defensive missiles, if the ballistic missiles, if they're struggling to engage ballistic missiles and have no chance of engaging hypersonic missiles, then it's sort of an academic question, because many of those ballistic missiles will get through, and all of the hypersonic missiles will get through. So no amount of really good air defense is going to solve that. I mean, of course, you'll be able to shoot down crews, you'll be able to shoot down the drones as well, come in at much lower speed. But again, if you've got the amount of these missiles coming in, then even if we were to keep on having the same amount of ammunition replenishment, I think the Israelis will still struggle, even with all the support of America and the West. Again, they're a very small country, and they're a 75th the size of Iran. And so, it doesn't take a mathematician to work out that actually those missiles, the same amount of missiles exchanged between the two countries, you've got a 75th of the target, so 75 times as many missiles coming in relative to the land area. So surprise, surprise, there's a lot of damage being done, and I suspect that more will be done. What will be really interesting will be to see if others decide to come in. If we start to see a resurrection of Hezbollah's campaign and the Houthi as well, because again, that will put even more pressure on Israel.
Yeah, and I've heard some reports that suggest that Iran has tens of thousands of like Shahed type drones, long-range type drones, and other than a handful at the beginning of this, like I think on the very first day, there's been very, very few drones used at all. It's just been the missiles. I wonder if, and this is just me asking questions because I don't have any knowledge about what the Iranians are doing, but I wonder because they did in the two big exchanges they had in 2024, they were heavy on drones. And then they had a big mix in the second one, but the first one was like 300 drones or so. And I'm wondering if are they going to maybe use a lot of these older ballistic missiles to weaken the amount of response or interceptor missiles that Israel has, and then once they don't have those, then they bring in possibly waves of these drones, because these drones, as you point out, they can be shot down by the Iron Dome and some of these other kinds of things. Certainly the U.S. Fighter aircraft can shoot those things down. But if you saturate an area and you don't have enough interceptor missiles, then even these old drones can fly in, or not old, but these slower moving drones can actually hit their target. How do you see that risk?
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right, Danny. From memory, the Iron Dome uses a weapon similar to what I would call Phalanx, which is a Gatling gun. We had two on the ship I commanded, and they're good guns, and they'll engage targets, but they're relatively short range. So from memory, we're about sort of a kilometer. So it's eyes of whites of the eye stuff. 1 kilometer to 2 kilometers is the maximum range for them. You can shoot down a target, then you go for another target, and eventually, of course, you run out of ammunition. They're relatively straightforward to rearm and quick to respond. But again, if you've got multiple targets coming in, then there's a limit to what you can do. If you've got 3 or 4 targets, you can deal with those. Although it's speaking in the operations room, it's hard work if you've got 3 or 4 targets coming in, unless they're coming in waves. But actually, if you've got more than that, then it is quite possible to saturate for a ship and operations room, a CIC, or the same thing ashore, just by weight of fire. So again, I wouldn't be surprised if that was at all. I remember as well, I don't know if you saw, Alistair Crook did a very interesting analysis of how the Iranians put that first attack together when there were 3 distinctive waves, and it struck me at the time that it was very sophisticated and thoughtful. And I would imagine that same level of sophistication and thought has gone into what they're doing at the moment. They may have been caught off guard by the surprise attacks, but they do seem to have responded in kind, and probably more so. And again, I would guess that they were been thinking the same way that I do, which is even if some of these do go astray, they're likely to hit decent targets, because actually it's a much smaller bowl of fish, if you like, whereas as opposed to an ocean, and they're bound to do damage. It's interesting that, again, as the Russians have done in Ukraine, they're targeting energy infrastructure and industrial infrastructure as well as the military infrastructure. And I would do the same in their circumstances. So it'd be interesting to see quite how damaged the Israeli economy is. I did hear that they hit the Israeli stock exchange. And again, there's another example of using your bombardment in a very strategic way.
Let's take a look at the other half of this equation, because it certainly appears, in fact, the Israeli side has claimed that they have air supremacy as opposed to air superiority over Iran, and that they can fly at will and do anything that they want. And certainly a lot of the targets that have been hit, it seems like the Israeli missiles so far are more precise. than the Iranian ones are, and they seem to be pretty effective at it. I think Iran has claimed that they've shot down 3 or 4 jets. I haven't seen any independent confirmation of that. Israel said they haven't been shot down any, but even if it was 4 out of the hundreds of sorties that have been flying, even if they did get those, it's a minuscule fraction. Does that imply that Iran doesn't have the capacity to defend its airs?
I don't know. I would be extremely surprised if the Israelis had air supremacy. I remember again from earlier in the year, it might have been late last year, when the Iranians responded. The Israelis were actually doing an attack by air and didn't actually go over Iran. And the reason, I think, is they came across radars or systems of which they weren't aware, and so they weren't prepared to risk. I mean, air supremacy means you have complete, utter carte blanche. Air superiority is different. So air superiority is not quite. It means that you have control of the skies, but still enemy fighters and air defense can get through. So air supremacy means you've got complete and utter control, which is pretty much where I would say Russia is, although even Russia isn't trying to dominate the skies over Ukraine because it doesn't need to. So I think there's a open question really about whether the Israelis do have air supremacy. My guess is that they don't, and they're actually using a lot more standoff weapons rather than putting the jets actually over the campaign. I think they will not want.
But in any case, even at standoff range, their missiles are getting through. Do you see any evidence of that Iran has any better of an ability to shoot down the missiles than Israel does?
Yeah, difficult to say. I think they've got a better chance. They're generally smaller warheads, the weapons, and there are few of them. I don't know of any. I'm just trying to think of the weapons. I can't think of them. Things like Harpoon was the ones that we used to use, which were subsonic. So if they're subsonic air launch weapons, then I think they'll be easier targets. And again, nothing to stop. You would expect the Israelis to use multiple targets to saturate defenses. They'll be using SEADs, Center Suppression of Enemy Air Defense. But again, it'd be interesting to see quite where the Iranians have got to, because they were operating generally the S-300, which is an older weapon system, 30 or 40 kilometer range, whereas there's talk of them actually operating now S-400, which is the more advanced Russian system, not the most advanced Russian system, but much longer range and much better capability as well. And from memory, I think they were being instructed by the Russians as well. So once they've got over the initial strikes, which would have come at the first surprise attack, which I can imagine would have done more damage than they had expected because it was a surprise. But once they've recovered, then I would expect them to be able to hold their own in terms of shooting things down, and probably do better, because I don't think the Israelis are using ballistic missiles, and they're certainly not using hypersonic missiles because we haven't got any.
Okay, so let's take a look at, now that we've kind of seen the capabilities that each side is having, both offense and defense, let's kind of assess as best we can what the objectives are of the two sides here. Okay, so Israel started the war. They had this surprise attack. They claimed initially that it was about the denuclearization, because they said Iran was weeks away from launching a bomb that could have produced one, and it was all over the map. But Netanyahu said months, and then he said maybe 6 months, maybe a year, maybe more, which seems kind of odd anyway. But the stated claim is that it was to prevent Iran from having a nuclear weapon, to try to tie in with what President Trump has said his goal is. But when you take a look at what the target sets are and what they're attacking, it looks more like they really are going for a regime change operation, given who they're hitting. This is my assessment, and I'm going to want yours. But I want to take a look in the next little bit here at what the strategic objectives at this point each side has. Let's first look at the Israeli side. As far as you can see, what is their attainable military objective, and will they be able to accomplish it?
I think their attainable middle objective was regime change. That's what they're talking about. You can see the targeting initially. But I think that was pretty much a one-shot pony. I think you might have 1 or 2 days opportunity, and hopefully that would happen. But actually, from everything we can see, it's had the reverse effect. So what is their subordinate objective? I would say now their subordinate objective is to get America in, because they're in trouble. So, their objective, I would suspect, is get America in, because they're now working on the basis that we're in trouble. we're not going to win a battle of attrition, strategic bombardment attrition against Iran.
Well, so hang on. Let's take a look at that. If it was regime change, and by that meaning regime decapitation in those opening rounds, and they didn't get it, now what is their objective?
I'm
sorry, you said to bring the United States in, but in order to do what?
I think in order to survive. I mean, I think no more than that. Actually, I think that they're making a mistake which Russia has made, and the Europeans have made, and indeed the neocons have made, which is that America is omnipotent. And yet we know, I think I talked about in that Balance of Power article that I did some time ago, that a lot of it depends on the geopolitical utility of your armed forces. America is a very, very powerful country, very powerful country. But the primary aspects of its armed forces are maritime and air. So its strength is in strategic bombardment and support of maritime operations. But actually, you won't do regime change now through without putting land forces on there. You know, that's obviously not going to happen. There's no appetite in America for it.
And you see on that headline that Gary just tossed up there, I think that's a current one. It looks to me, if your assessment is correct, and I'm inclined to agree with it, that it was a regime change op to try to either foment the opposition from rising up, or to take out the supreme leader, so that it would by de facto cause some kind of a new regime to come in here. Now it looks like they're going backwards and going, okay, no. It's not regime change. It's actually remove the nuclear program, because that's something that, especially if they bring in, they think anyway, that they bring in the GBU-57 bunker buster, the 30,000-pound bomb to take out Fordo, then they can say, okay, we succeeded. War's over. We're ready to go home. Do you think that that's where they're heading now?
Yeah, I think that might be. There's a political narrative here, isn't it? And the political narrative is actually this is about nuclear, sort of preemptive nuclear disarmament. I was very interested. There's an article on Zero Hedge which I saw yesterday. It's got Netanyahu over 20 years talking about Iranian weapons being just 2 weeks away or 2 months ago.
Yeah, just right on the brink.
You know, we're nearly there. We're nearly there. So I can imagine them walking back, and they sort of have to walk back in a way, because actually, if they haven't succeeded in regime change, then to admit they haven't succeeded means that they've failed to achieve their primary objective. But again,
so what do you think the Iranian side is? So they were attacked, so they didn't get a choice in whether they're going to go on an op or not. But now they have to respond. What is their objective, and is it attainable?
I think their objective is to make this very painful for Israel. And very painful for the people of Israel, and for the people of Israel to realize that what they've been told by their government about the efficacy of Iron Dome and their air defense systems and the supremacy of Israeli armed forces isn't true. And so that they need to start thinking in a sort of different way. I don't think it's much more than that. I mean, they may want to achieve regime change, and that would be the removal of Netanyahu. But I wouldn't think that that's their primary objective, although I would imagine they wouldn't be surprised if they did achieve it, and they'd be pleased if they did. But I think what they will want to do is to make sure this never happens again. And the way to do that is to actually make it do a lot of damage to, and they'll not do a lot of damage to Israel in exactly the way that they predicted they would if Israel attacked them, so that actually people will never again think about that in the same way. So that's what I think would be
So is it a situation right now for Iran that they are in some sense similar to like the North Vietnamese in the U.S.-Vietnam War, where basically they just needed to survive. They just needed to not be destroyed and then outlast the bigger power. Is that now an attainable objective?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, in a way, it's a bit like has Hamas on the one hand and Hezbollah on the other hand. Actually, for them, victory is not being defeated in Israel. And indeed, I think Hamas have actually achieved that in a way. They haven't been defeated. I think you could argue the same for Hezbollah, although I think it's been a bit more difficult. But I do think it's slightly different for Iran. I suspect that Iran, if they're not defeated, it will to a certain extent be a success. But I would think that given they are a very capable nation, that what they will want to do is to make sure that this never ever again happens. And the best way to do that is to inflict significant damage on the Israeli economics, on the Israeli infrastructure, on Israeli armed forces, so that actually it's not necessarily a defeat, but actually the Israel people take the same view. Because I think, again, that Netanyahu's bet here was that if the regime change didn't go right, then actually get the Americans in, the Americans could do it. But I don't think the Americans, with all the combat power that's available, would be interested to see what you think. I don't think the Americans will have any more success in trying to achieve regime change in Tehran than Netanyahu did.
So we're roughly a week into this, and at least up to this point, I mean, Iran's going to have some staying power, because I think I saw a poll out just this morning inside Israel that still said 80-something%, maybe 84%, somewhere around 80-something% said, yeah, we think that we need to just continue on, and we need to destroy Iran and just keep on moving forward. So they don't seem to be backing down or think that it was a bad idea, et cetera. Then let's get back to what you said, kind of one of the subordinate objectives of or maybe even the secondary objective of the Israeli side, and that's to get the United States involved. Benjamin Netanyahu was asked that earlier today, where that is.
The partnership with President Trump, with whom I speak to almost every day, is incredible. I think his resolve, his determination, and his clarity when he says Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon, and for that to take place, Iran cannot enrich uranium. It's as simple as that. He gave them the chance to do it through negotiations. They strung him along. You don't string along Donald Trump. He knows the game. And I think that we're both committed to making sure that Iran will not have a nuclear weapon, and they won't.
To me, this looks like he is absolutely just buttering up Trump. He knows that Trump loves praise, and so he's talking about this great leader. I talk to him every day, so we're involved in all this. Interestingly, at the first part, to the question is, will the U.S. join him? He basically says they already are. They're already providing all this information. He lays out a lot of the assets that the United States is doing. I said at the top of the show, there's lots of combat power coming over, not just the three strike groups, not just some additional destroyers, lots of air power already in the region. And then now there's lots of C-17s worth of supplies that have been coming over, like a bunch of them. Also, allegedly up to 30 refueling air tankers, implying a sustained air campaign, et cetera. So it looks like lots of power moving into the region here. Let's just look at that first of all. Do you think the United States, from what you can see on your side of the pond, is going to go more than just help defensive, but move to the offensive?
I think it's not impossible. I think it would be a major strategic mistake, because I suspect that the same thing would happen in much larger scale than happened in the Red Sea, where essentially a US carrier battle group was defeated by the Houthis. I'm not saying that wouldn't be painful for Iran. I think it would be painful for Iran, but I think Iran could expect and would get support from around the region. I think they get support from Russia. I think they get support from Pakistan. I think they get support from China as well. Not quite sure what that would take, but I would expect that. And it would be difficult for the Americans to complain about that, having supported Ukraine.
Difficult, but not impossible. We don't have any problem. Double standards is no problem for most of our officials.
Yeah. But like you, I thought Netanyahu just talking, it sounded to me like he was talking to Trump and really buttering him up. And I think that actually he is making a mistake, and it's the same mistake that Zelensky made, and it's the same mistake I think that the Europeans are making, which they assume that if America's in, then America's omnipotent, and therefore America will win. I don't find it very difficult to believe, because
do you think that people still think America's omnipotent after watching Afghanistan for 2 decades and Iraq and all that? Do they still think that?
I think, it's difficult to explain otherwise why they act like they do. Why would, if you didn't think that, why wouldn't Netanyahu? And
in 3 years of, now 3.5 years of failing to help Ukraine win its war. Everywhere you look, we're failing militarily. So I don't know where people come off thinking that way, but
I think
I guess they do, right?
It's almost like sort of unipolar moment. Momentum, the sort of thinking is still there. It's within the neocons. You could say it's within the European foreign and military security establishment, who generally tend to do what the Americans want to do and support the Americans in some ridiculous circumstances. At the moment, this is an illegal war. There's no UN Security Council resolution on it. The Iranians have had their nuclear facilities open to the IAEA, and they've signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty some time ago. Israel has done neither of those. And yet Israel is conducting a sort of Pearl Harbor, or sort of the Japanese side of a Pearl Harbor strike, and working on the assumption that actually if a regime change objective failed, that actually at least they would have America as a backstop. And I think this is a time for American leaders to be very careful, because actually if they do come in and it's unsuccessful, or they come in and huge amounts of Iranian civilians are killed in somewhere like Tehran or something, then the stock of the West and the stock of America in particular around the world is going to be even further on the floor than it already is. People don't realize that actually, because of our Western media is so polarized and so one-sided, they don't realize what's going on in the rest of the world. And the rest of the world are looking at this in a very different way.
And I want to point out in this next clip I'm going to play here, one of the big reasons why a lot of people don't listen to what we say and do have this obvious double standards here. This is another comment. This is one you have to. It's you got closed caption on the bottom in English, so you'll have to look at that bit here. But here's Netanyahu in front of a hospital that was hit by Iranian fire this morning. Watch this.
אני כאן בבית החולים סורוקה בבאר שבע יחד עם שר הבריאות, עם סגן השר אלמוג כהן איש הדרום, ועם לא פעם ראשונה עם מנהל בית החולים סורוקה. אנחנו רואים כאן את כל ההבדל. אנחנו פוגעים במדויק במטרות צבאיות, במטרות גרעין, במטרות טילים, והם פוגעים בבית חולים. הם פוגעים בבית חולים שאנשים לא יכולים לקום ולברוח אפילו. הם פוגעים כאן, לא רחוק מכאן. יש כאן מחלקת ילדים ותינוקות. זה כל ההבדל בין דמוקרטיה שפועלת לפי החוק כדי להציל את עצמה מהרוצחים האלה, ומול הרוצחים האלה שמעוניינים להשמיד אותנו, להשמיד כל אחד ואחד מאיתנו עד האחרון שבינינו. אני חושב שזה...
So you don't have to have been paying very much attention at all to the war over the past 18 months prior to this, to where Israelis did everything they could to eliminate every hospital that there was in the Gaza Strip, and always with the same claim, well, it was being used by the enemy. They were doing something underneath it every single time, and they had no compunction doing that. And you see even today that while everyone's focused on this here, the Israeli attacks into the Gaza Strip keep killing large numbers of people every day. And Israel specifically has been targeting people at food distribution centers. One of the most horrible things you can even imagine. So for Benjamin Netanyahu to sit there and say, we're this enemy, and look at those evil Iranians because they hit a hospital. And by the way, let me not defend anybody who hit a hospital. That is a violation of every law of war that there is, and just humanity. So if they actually targeted that, that's to be condemned. But for you to say as evidence of their evilness, and you use that term, when you do it as a course of action, that doesn't play well internationally for your side.
Yeah, no, of course, the way that it's played by the Israeli armed forces is that the damage against hospital is collateral damage, because, of course, it was harboring Hamas or something like that. And yet, and same with the Iranian television bombing which happened. But you kind of have both ways, because the Iranians have said exactly that. On the hospital attack was actually a military attack close to the hospital rather than the hospital itself. And in making that military attack, the situation is that Israel is a much smaller country, much more densely populated. So the military and other parts of the infrastructure will be much closer. And so that's the risk that Israel took when it launched the attack in the first place. So I'm afraid that
I'm sorry, Gary, do you have some kind of breaking news here?
Yeah.
Breaking in the sense that at a press conference, she announced that the decision on Iran is going to be coming in the next 2 weeks.
Can we listen in a second?
Oh, sure, of course. Yep.
Yeah.
no enrichment of a uranium, and it would absolutely not. Iran is not absolutely not able to achieve a nuclear weapon. The president has been very clear about that. And by the way, the deal that Special Envoy Witkoff proposed to the Iranians was both realistic and acceptable within its terms, and that's why the president is sent that deal to them.
To follow up on what you told Natalie, are the talks that the United States is currently having with Iran direct, or are those through intermediaries? And if so, which countries are acting as the intermediary right now?
Out of respect for the ongoing discussions and negotiations, I am not going to get into the details of them. We've provided you confirmation for now. Go ahead. Sure, and then behind you too.
Oh, okay. Sorry, so thanks. Sorry. On the topic of negotiations and talks, does the president have any hopes or specific expectations for the talks tomorrow between European foreign secretaries and their Iranian counterpart?
Well, certainly the entire world is on the president's side when it comes to the fact that Iran cannot obtain a nuclear weapon. This is something that pretty much all of humanity, except for the Iranian terrorist regime themselves, agree upon. And so the president expects that Europe will deliver that message directly to the Iranians.
Why does President Trump believe that this 90-day extension on TikTok will provide more runway, perhaps, than the previous extensions that haven't led to a divestment deal?
Because it's more time to make a good deal. Simple question. Dasha?
Thank you so much. I know things are going day by day right now. The president wants maximum optionality. Is the possibility of the U.S. getting involved in regime change in Iran at all on the table at this point? And then I have one on.
Sure. The president's top priority right now is ensuring that Iran cannot obtain a nuclear weapon and providing peace and stability in the Middle East.
And on Medicaid, Caroline,
Sure.
The Senate put forward Medicaid provisions, particularly a lower cap on
All right,
state
Garrett,
provider
we're
taxes.
going to get into some other issues now. One thing I want to zero in on there. Number one, actually, let's talk about the headline there. That he's going to make it in 2 weeks, i.e. there was lots of reports here in town, and I was talking to some folks just before we came on the air here today who were very well connected to the administration that said that they believed that the decision had already been made to attack, and that they needed more time for logistics or whatever, but perhaps by the end of the weekend there could be bombing. Well, now then we see that's moved to 2 weeks. So I guess I'm just asking you to use your crystal ball here a little bit, but is your gut tell you that this is like, all right, well, we need a little bit more time to get our ducks in order so that before we start something, we're able to do it? Or do you think that this actually means that there's a chance for some kind of diplomacy to avoid the conflict at all?
Yeah, I think as soon as I heard that, my first thinking was that in the White House, what's going on is, we might want to have a bit more of a think about this rather than just launching straight into attack. Because if people have done the sort of calculations that you and I and others will have done, they'll think we may throw ourselves into this and come out losing. And that would be very bad for America. So I would want to have a really good think. And as soon as I heard Witkoff's name unmentioned, I thought, okay, well, that's interesting and encouraging. He's an intelligent man. He may be a real estate man, but actually he had managed to get quite a long way down the path of giving the Iranians, agreeing with the Iranians what they wanted. The people who have been the major obstacle to this is actually Netanyahu and the extremists within Israel who didn't want those deals for reasons that I think seem clear to me. So I think there is a genuine possibility. They may be doing it to build up a military force, but I sort of doubt it. I sort of rather think there's a genuine possibility because, again, there will no doubt be one or two in the White House or in the president's inner circle who are saying, look, this could all go wrong, and if it goes wrong, it'll be a defeat following on the heels of our defeat in Ukraine. So we may just want to see if we can... Following
on the heels of our defeat against the Houthis, you can add that one to that list.
Yeah, and the Houthis as well, So, because I would say that the outcome is by no means certain. Indeed, I would, if I had to bet, and even with America in, I think Iran would take a pasting. But I think there would be a fair bit of casualties around the region. I know you're particularly concerned, and rightly so, about American bases around the region. That's not far from Bahrain to Iran.
Right.
American naval base.
A stone's throw, practically.
Yeah, you tell me how you actually protect those. I mean, that may be one of the reasons that the Iranians are holding back some of their missiles, because actually if the Americans do come in, they'll go all out and plaster the lot of them. And how many American servicemen and women will be killed then? So I just like to think there is a bit of common sense coming in, because that 2 weeks is not tomorrow. And it means that it's there is the opportunity for more talking.
One other thing I wanted to go on that she said in there, because I think it's important, and I've got something to tag off of this. She said the whole world is on Trump's side, obviously. So she said, but when you look at what Vladimir Putin has said, Gary, if you could play the one from Putin where he was talking about that they're going to stick with Iran.
Мы продолжаем наши отношения. Это первое. А второе, я уже об этом сказал. Наши специалисты работают в Бушере. 250 человек. И еще командированные. Общая численность может достигать 600. И мы не уходим.
So that sounds to me like Russia saying, hey, we have 250 of our folks at Bashir, which is one of the main nuclear energy facilities, and we might even double it, more than double it, up to 600 people. And that look of determination still on his face looked to me, and I interpreted it, you can tell me what you think, that he basically said, I dare you to test me on this.
Yeah, I think the message is that we're not backing out of Iran. You know, we made an agreement with Iran we have a military relationship with Iran, so we're not backing out, and indeed we're prepared to actually invest more if necessary. And if they're starting to put in S-400 and even S-500, probably not S-500, but if they did, then I certainly, as an aviator going over Iran, I'd be nervous, because if indeed they have shot down F-35, key point there is stealth aircraft. So, very small radar signature. But if they've shot them down, there's talk about 2 or 3 F-35 being shot down. It means that stealth isn't the protection necessarily that you need. And so you've got to need a much better SEAD campaign, suppression of enemy air defense campaign. So I think it's very important that the Russians are doing that, but very important the Americans actually take note of that as well, especially if you're looking for a post-Ukraine war position where the Americans and the Russians are getting back into a more collaborative, not necessarily collaborative, but a diplomatic relationship.
Yeah, it's diplomatic,
which we're all desperate for. But to say that the rest of the world is against Iran, it's simply untrue. I mean, the rest of the world.
And of course, we also have China itself. In the last 48 hours or so, reportedly has sent 4 747 style plane loads of military gear. We don't know what. At least I haven't seen any reports that have said what it is, other than that they came in and dropped off something before going back. So that doesn't seem like they're all on a Trump side as well. You know what? You mentioned earlier in this episode here that there was lots of people who were kind of even here still detached from reality and thinking that the impossible can be attained, even though a base analysis that you have done here for us shows that there is so much more downside than there is upside for potential U.S. entry into this in an offensive way. But there are still plenty of folks on the U.S. side that are very much in the denial camp, to the point to where they are probably cheerleaders. Let's look first at our brother Lindsey Graham.
The days of expecting Israel to sit on the sidelines and not go to the heart of the beast are over. Take this regime down, make the world a better place.
So just straight up regime change. And so this guy, he's a golfing buddy of Trump, not just a Republican somewhere. This guy has a close relationship with Trump going back many, many years. So when you hear him saying stuff, and of course that's just one of many things that he has said in recent weeks, especially, you wonder how much of an impact does that have when because you already just saw it, that Netanyahu is doing the same butter-up job. What do you think of that?
I mean, what's the strategy? How's he going to do it? I mean, we talked a couple of sessions ago about the platoon of generals who have been saying how this should be done. We should put him straight in that platoon and send him across and see how he thinks about
best idea I've ever heard. I love it.
Yeah. But what is the strategy? How are you going to do your best shot, I would have said, for the regime change was the surprise attack. It didn't work. So the only other alternative, I very much doubt how will you achieve it by strategic bombardment? I mean, strategic bombardment, Operation Rolling Thunder during Vietnam War. Yeah, it didn't work. The strategic bombardment by the West of or Britain and Germany did have an effect during the Second World War. We were at war, but it only had an effect when we moved from bombing population centres to really going after the German economy. Then it started to make a difference.
And then you had ground troops go in mass.
Yeah, you had ground troops
all
coming
that
in
together.
Well. Yeah, so it was sort of strategic all arms combat, if you like. What with that and the way in which the navies were actually closing down German resources. But really, unless you're prepared to invest land forces in the Iranian campaign, don't think it's going to work.
And I'm sorry, we're running really short on time here because we actually have another show coming up in 10 minutes here. But I don't want to let you go until we take a look at this one more, because this is another longtime Republican, former House Speaker Newt Gingrich, who went on Fox News last night and has as big of a maximalist idea of where this is going as even I can imagine.
When historians look back and say, did Donald Trump really make a difference? Think about this. The original Ayatollah Khomeini first started calling us the Great Satan in 1978. Iranian mobs began chanting death to America in 1979 when they seized illegally the American embassy. They have been taunting us, attacking us, harassing us all these years through all these presidents. And finally, they have collided with Donald J. Trump, and he's crossed the line. He and Netanyahu are partners, much like Reagan and Margaret Thatcher were partners, and the two of them are going to change history.
So Reagan and Thatcher come back from the grave and they're going to change history. Well, I think he may be right in one sense. They could certainly change history, though maybe not quite in the way they thought.
Yeah. I mean, Reagan and Thatcher did change history, but the way they did it was through peace and diplomacy. The way they did it was talking to the Russians and establishing that relationship. And that was led to the end of the Cold War. And I congratulate that for them. Whatever you think of their politics, they changed history because they understood Gorbachev. And then people began talking to. This doesn't seem to be the way to change history to me. And let's just look back. What have we had? We've had Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya, and now Russia, Ukraine, and now the Iranian war. Tell me one of those which has been a real success. People say Syria might be, but it seems to me that what we've done in Syria, we've established the caliphate that we'd hoped to close down for ISIS. So we've got a Syrian caliphate, and with the exception of the early months and the early years in Afghanistan, everything else has been pretty much a disaster. So it's about time that we actually, instead of thinking that we can keep using the same playbook, which has gone wrong on every occasion so far in the last 25 years, and expect it to work again. That's what Einstein would have called lunacy, to keep doing the same thing and expecting something different to happen. The key point of this is
do it harder. That's the thing. We just didn't do it hard enough. If we did more,
Key thing in this is strategic thinking, proper strategic thinking, doing your detailed analysis, understanding the countries that we're working with, and really doing the thoughtful thinking about what's in your national interest and taking it from there with proper strategic estimates. But we're a bit way off from that, I'm afraid, Danny. You've got to go. I've got to go. I'm about to go and do a bit of time with Larry Johnson now as well. So we're both back to back.
Very good. Yeah, look forward to it. We actually have here in just a few minutes the famous Alexander Mercurius, and he's going to talk about some of the issues related between the Iran-Israel war and the Russia-Ukraine war. Don't want to miss that, folks. Just tune back in 5 minutes from now. We'll see you in just a few minutes on the Daniel Davis Deep Dive.